Hello, everyone. Based on where you're joining us from, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to you. You are very welcome to another Twitter space that is hosted here under the Digital Agenda Forum. My name is Claire Babidia. I am a data scientist, and I'll be moderating this session. For those of you who have tuned into our previous discussions, just to mention but a few, the most recently concluded series on the future of money and identity, and that was on central bank digital currencies and digital IDs, where we had an expert in finance who enlightened us on what CBDCs and digital IDs mean for you and I, and also whether they are the future of financial empowerment or rather an avenue which could be used towards tighter government control. And also another discussion which we had where we explored the digital IDs in this era of AI, and of course looking into our increasing dependency on digital systems, and questioned where the line should be drawn with this artificial intelligence gaining momentum, and also on the other hand, having a push for digital IDs accelerating every other day. So in that discussion, we reflected on the potential risks of integrating these two systems. And so today we are riding with that same energy. But unlike the previous discussions, today we are flipping the mic to the youth. So at Digital Agenda Forum, we are all about embracing technology, innovation, and of course in the process we ask tough questions, because we know that not everything that is presented as shiny is actually something that serves the public good, especially if we talk about things like digital IDs. And so tonight, or this morning, this afternoon, we are putting our youth to the spotlight, and knowing that these youth are not only users of the technology, but they are also builders of this technology, and probably they need to challenge these systems, but also looking at the fact that at the end of the day, probably they're the ones who are most likely to be affected by how these systems are built and also rolled out at the end of the day. So we've got an awesome lineup of youth panelists, and these include developers of the tech. We have a data scientist on the panel. We have a software engineer on the panel. We have lawyers. We have policy analysts, and they are ready to share their thoughts on digital IDs while keeping it honest. So as you listen into the conversation, just feel free to react. You can tweet your thoughts. You can request to speak. The host should be able to see that and grant you access. And of course, we would love to hear from you as we get into the conversation. So allow me introduce the panelists today. I have Asha Wandulu. So as I introduce you, you just briefly unmute, just for me to be sure that you can hear me, and also say hi to the audience. So you'll introduce yourself. You'll introduce yourself at a later time as I call you into the conversation. So for now, you'll just unmute and say hello to the audience for me to confirm that you can hear me. So on the team, on the panel, I have Asha Wandulu, and Asha is a seasoned policy analyst. She is a founder and CEO of Asha Lumi Governance Network Limited. She has a strong passion for governance and policy development. She believes effective governance is crucial for the prosperity of nations, businesses, and communities. And through Asha Lumi, she advocates for policies that prioritize human flourishing, economic growth, and sustainability. Asha is dedicated to shaping governance systems which promote well-being and also aim to build a community of leaders and change makers committed to empowering individuals and communities to thrive. Asha, you're very welcome, and she will discuss from a policy and governance perspective. Asha, could you unmute and say hello to us?
Okay, yes, please. Thank you very much, Claire. Hello, everyone, to all the panelists and the listeners. Asha Wandulu, as I have been introduced by Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. So next is Stephen Bongomins. I hope I got it right, Stephen. And he is a data scientist and a youth leader, as well as an advocate. Stephen, could you unmute and say hello to the audience?
Hello everyone. I'm grateful to be here. My name is Stephen Bongomin, and I think I didn't do myself justice in my submission CV. The pre-current introduction was really elaborate, but I think I'll do due justice when my time to introduce myself comes. But I'm excited for this conversation and can't wait to get into it.
That would be perfect. Thank you, Stephen. Next, I have Moses Businge. And Moses is a software engineer. He's a photographer and designer, and he will discuss from the software engineering perspective. Moses, do you want to say hello to us?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here on this space this evening. And not much is known about most software engineers, so my bio may be small, but as we get into the conversation, we'll get to expound on it. I'm really excited for this conversation happening today because the youth are, we are shaping the future and the future is ours. So glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moses, for sharing your sentiments, and we look forward to hearing from you. Next is Shanice Naisenya. Shanice, I hope I got the last name right. She is a versatile lawyer, and she specializes in commercial law and data privacy. Shanice holds an LLB from Kenyatta University, and she is a certified privacy professional. And as a compliance advisor, she is well versed in GDPR. Shanice, you'll explain that to us, but particularly within African contexts. She is also an active member of the Data Privacy and Governance Society of Kenya, where she contributed to the 2024 Professional Survey Report. So her expertise spans research, project management, data analytics, into compliance, and she will discuss from data privacy and protection perspective. Shanice, could you unmute and say hello to us?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, Claire, you did pronounce my name well. It's an honor to be here. It's always weird hearing an introduction, so I don't think I'll get used to that anytime soon. And just to clarify, the GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Shanice, for being here. And lastly, on the panel, I have Lynn Edinas Olepus. She is a lawyer with multiple leadership roles, including head of secretariats at ICRAD, company secretary and head of general administration and finance at the Amicable Nutritionist Company Limited. She is also a director at NCSA, which I perceive she'll speak about, and also an advocacy officer at Femme Justice for Women's Legal and Economic Empowerment. She is a passionate advocate for youth and human rights, and she champions causes that uplift marginalized voices, particularly in student rights and religious freedom. Lynn's leadership at NCSA fosters student empowerment, while at ICRAD she works on global human rights and religious freedom issues. And in addition to her advocacy, she ensures smooth operations at TANC and mentors aspiring leaders, especially young women, through her experience in pageantry, having been crowned Rising Woman Miss Tourism TESO in 2023 and Miss Creativity Miss Tourism TESO in 2023. Lynn's work reflects her commitment to making a meaningful difference, empowering others, and also inspiring change. and lean from an advocacy and leadership perspective with a particular focus on faith and religious freedom. So she'll be discussing from that angle. Lynn, could you say hello to us? Lynn, are you on the call? Okay, probably she is yet to join us. So as the team working on the background helps in getting her online, we will start into the conversation. And I'll start with you, Asha Wandulu, on the front of, does a centralized digital ID truly foster inclusion, or does it further exclude marginalized groups?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, once again. I hope I'm audible enough and everyone else can hear me.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a short brief about myself and what I do. Asha Wandulu, and I'm the founder and the CEO of the Ashalumi Governance Network Limited. What we do under Ashalumi is we develop governance models, policy frameworks, and innovative solutions for economic development through fostering governance, through fostering effective governance, I beg your pardon, and empowering communities, private public sectors, and governments to navigate the complexities of modern society through collaborative knowledge sharing and forward-thinking strategies to ensure economic development. But for today, I'm going to address a very critical question. Does a centralized digital ID truly foster inclusion, or does it further exclude marginalized groups? Well, the digital agenda often is framed as a progressive and inevitable shift towards a fully digitalized society, poses significant risks to individual freedoms, governance, and human autonomy. While digitalization offers efficiency and convenience, so to say, its unchecked expansion can lead to excessive surveillance, corporate monopolization, and the erosion of fundamental rights. So ideally, centralized systems by design concentrate power in the hands of governments or private entities managing data. Historical abuses of identity systems from, let's say, for example, the apartheid pass laws to modern surveillance systems remind us that centralized control over identity can be weaponized. A case study is India's Aadhaar system. It touted like as the world's largest digital program. So Aadhaar's biometrical authentication failed manual laborers, which I categorize as marginalized groups, the elderly citizens whose fingerprints were eroded by time of work. And as a result, the marginalized groups were denied subsidized food, pensions, and healthcare, to which to me, these are really basic needs. So this kind of efficiency and, so to say, conveniency came at a cost to these marginalized groups. So additionally, Kenya's, I think, Haduma number, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, yeah, mandatory registration excluded rural populations lacking internet access or documentation. So privacy concerns surged as a result, as data breaches exposed sensitive information, leaving marginalized Kenyans vulnerable to exploitation. So to me, I believe when your identity is tied to a system you don't trust or can't even navigate, inclusion becomes a hollow promise. And until we address the structural inequities like access, accountability, and privacy, I believe centralized digital IDs may well deepen exclusion under the guise of progress. Thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you, Asha. And I would love to bring in Stephen. So, Stephen, do you think there are challenges and obstacles that young people in undeserved communities might face in obtaining and using a digital ID? In case they are there, which ones, to be specific? Stephen, I can't hear you. I don't know if it's on my end. Asha, can you hear Stephen?
No, I can't hear him.
Okay, Stephen, we can't hear you. Probably you could reconnect. And maybe as you're reconnecting, I'll bring in Asha again. And Asha, so if you look at the SDG 16.9, it portrays digital IDs as essential for development. But does that progress truly depend on digital IDs, or can meaningful development be achieved without them? Aren't there any other alternative ways to ensure access to services, economic participation and governance without relying on this centralized digital identification system, which would necessitate integrating biometrics with technology?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, for that profound question. Well, SDG 16 aims to provide legal identity for all, including birth registration by 2030. But from my perspective, I believe digital IDs assumes a one-size-fits-all solution for a world of diverse realities. When you look at meaningful development, it has happened for centuries without digital IDs. So let's take a case study of the post-World War II. Europe built economies and welfare states using paper-based systems. For Japan's post-war boom relied on analog records, not biometrics. Even today, community-based approaches like self-help groups or Brazil Bolsa Familia program delivers tangible progress without particularly mandating centralized digital identity. So these examples suggest that development rests more on political will, equitable policies, and local innovation than on any technological silver bullet. So the risks of over-relying on digital IDs is real, especially for the global south, where SDG 16 is most pressing. So nearly 40% of just sub-Saharan Africa lacks electricity access, and internet penetration hovers below 50%. So to me, rolling out a digital ID in such contexts assumes a level of infrastructure that doesn't exist, and building it diverts funds from more immediate needs like schools, hospitals. In this context, sub-Saharan Africa. So, and also there's like the human factor where, yes, we know, yes, legal identity matters as stated in SDG 16, but digital isn't the only way to really deliver that. So when you look at paper birth certificates, which most of us use, even in Uganda, we have paper birth certificates, community registries, or even mobile SMS-based verification can establish identity without the complexity of the whole centralized databases. So for me, these low-tech options are cheaper, more resilient to power outages, again, from a sub-Saharan African context, or cyber attacks, and don't require citizens to surrender sensitive data to untested systems. So the push for digital IDs also glosses over exclusionary pitfalls. When you look at biometric failures, common among manual laborers with worn fingerprints, like I mentioned earlier, can lock people out of their own identities. And such glitches have denied food rations to the poorest, which are, from the context of sub-Saharan Africa, it's a bigger margin. So privacy erosion and surveillance creep further, erode trust, especially in fragile states where data can be misused. So for me, I believe there are several alternative approaches to ensure access to services, economic participation, and governance without necessarily relying on centralized digital identification systems that integrate biometrics with technology. And among the few, this say, for example, that governments or organization, they could ensure physical cards, vouchers, or certificates that serve as proof of identity or eligibility for services like hospitals, education. So this could use simple security features like QR codes without biometric linkage to those QR codes to prevent any fraud and any, weaponization or misuse. So, for example, a paper-based voting card or a locally issued economic participation voucher could work without digital centralization. The other thing could be the blockchain technology, can enable self-sovereign identity systems where individuals control their own identity data without using cryptographic keys stored on personal devices or paper backups. So services and governance structures could verify credentials through zero-knowledge proofs, which confirm eligibility without revealing unnecessary, personal details. So for me, this avoids centralized databases and biometrics entirely. So when you look at the grassroots angle, community-based verification, I believe local communities or trusted intermediaries like LCs, village leaders, cooperatives, or NGOs, they could vouch for individuals' identities or rights to access services. This relies on social trust and localized knowledge because I believe, these leaders have for so long, interacted with the people in their communities, so you could base on their localized knowledge rather than technological infrastructure, making it viable in low-tech environments, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, the other could be for economic participation of certain services. Systems could allow anonymous or pseudo-anonymous access using temporary identifiers, like, let me say, for example, one-time codes or tickets. This could apply to cash-based economies, public transport, or aid distribution, ensuring inclusion without necessarily, want to avoid the whole issue of tracking individuals and all that. So instead of a centralized digital system, records could be maintained in paper form at local levels with a non-biometric, cross-referencing key details for consistency. For instance, like I mentioned earlier, birth certificates or property deeds could be locally stored and verified without a national, the whole avoiding of a centralized biometric database. So for me, I believe a non-biometric digital system could use simple pins, passwords, or device-based keys issued to these individuals, and this could be managed locally or offline, avoiding centralized control and biometric integration while still enabling, access, which is very, very key, while still enabling access to online services for all individuals without excluding anyone. Yeah, thank you very much. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Asha. Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well and clear. Can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. If you may
Okay.
repeat your question, please.
All right. I'll go ahead and do that. And so from Asha's submission, there is a concern around access and privacy. And so I wanted to inquire from you, do you think there are challenges and obstacles that young people in undeserved communities face in obtaining and using a digital ID? And if you think they are there, could you provide some of those challenges?
Yeah, yes, surely. Thank you for the question. And I had some technical issues, and I may still have them. So bear with me in case I glitch. I'm very remote in the district of Gulu, in a very remote area where the network isn't so good. So bear with me, my people. So I want to say good evening to everyone. Thank you for everyone for sparing their time with us and to having a date and indulging in this conversation that is really pertinent in our society. And to the viewers, thank you for making a date. You could be doing anything else, but you've chosen to be part of us. First, I want to also say a big thank you to Digital Agenda Forum for this, giving us the space. Thank you for inviting me. I don't take it lightly. I'm really honored and grateful for this invite, and I can't wait to delve more into this conversation. Earlier on, I felt they didn't do justice in my introduction, so if I may introduce myself again. My name is Bongomin Stephen. As the bio clearly states, I'm a data scientist and a youth leader. So how am I a data scientist? Obviously, I pursued a bachelor's in electrical and telecommunications engineering and then majored in data science. And right now I do works in regards to data science, and I'm a youth leader too and a youth advocate, whereby I subscribe to the NRM party. And in what I do in the youth leadership space is we mobilize for young people to really participate in the electoral cycle, participate in government programs, and take full advantage of opportunities that come their way. To answer your question, as a youth leader, surely the digital IDs comes with its cons. It comes with its pros and cons. So when I look at the digital IDs, I first question, who are the people pushing the digital IDs upon us? In my research, it is the World Economic Forum, the UN, and globalists like Bill Gates. And whenever I see globalists pushing anything, I always have my eyebrows raised, because there's always a hidden agenda when it comes to globalists. They are usually pushing money into their pockets, so there's always a eyebrow raised there. So to answer your question, the issues that the young people in the rural area, which is predominantly, if you look at the demographic of Uganda, it's predominantly young. If you go by the recent UBOS statistic report, it shows that 78% of Uganda is constituted by the young people. And most of these young people are in remote areas. And if you bring such an idea like digital ID, you have to ask questions like access. So one of the biggest challenges the young people in the rural areas face is access, which I would call the digital divide. The digital divide is just a gap between the haves and the have-nots. What do I mean? The people who can access this infrastructure and phones and internet connectivity, as opposed to the majority of the youth who are in rural areas and are poor and can access this. And for such a digital ID to really be implemented, for it to take shape, for it to feel its effect, all the youth have to have access to it. But in my own perspective, there is a huge digital divide, which is access divide. There's also the skill divide. How many youth in the rural areas have the skills, have the digital literacy to really know how to maneuver and work through these digital IDs? It's a concept that may sound very alien to them, So that's another issue that the young people in the rural area may face. Another issue is the usage divide, which I could say is just access to the digital services. This is access to the phones, the smartphones, access to just the people who can guide them on how to use this. So those are some of the few issues that the people in the rural areas can have. Another is just the risk of exclusion. You get, we have to put in fact that how many young people can have proper documentation, because for these digital IDs to take shape, there should be proper documentation. Every young person must be counted. If you are to go by the census that was conducted last year, it had a lot of flaws to the point that the UBOS report was discarded. Imagine UBOS is the biggest organ in the country that conducts in charge of statistics, but even their report was discarded and had so many flaws. So what about the young people in the rural area? Are they going to be documented? Are they going to have access to all this? So all these issues have to be put in account. Then we have to also talk about infrastructure. Do we have the infrastructure really? Infrastructure to push such a foreign agenda? You get, because we are a very, very poor country, and is digital IDs really the issue, really the agenda that we as a country should be really advocating for when we have poor access to poor roads? Everyone today in Kampala, so if you're in Kampala today, going to work was one of the worst experiences. The roads were flooding, so we have other problems that we must be putting our money into, as opposed to such I would still call it a foreign agenda. We have issues of access to quality of education. These are things that need priority as opposed to the digital IDs. So whereas it has its pros, I feel its cons outweigh the pros. And if you even put in terms of the fact, the privacy risk, as I said, I'm a young politician, I'm a young leader who is maybe vying for office next year. With such centralized IDs, government can have access to all your information, which can lead to political persecution and surveillance and data exploitation. So, considering all these factors, which there are still very many, which I would love to still discuss as the discussions unfold, I feel the cons really outweigh the pros, and there is need for more understanding, need for more discussions, and need for more engagement to whether this is really the way forward. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen, for enlightening us on the challenges. And somewhere in your bio, you highlighted that you're a youth leader and you're an advocate. And I wanted to ask you, so this 78% population that is from the recent exercise that was carried out by UBOS last year, how much do young people trust their governments? Assuming you're speaking for this 78%, how much do young people trust their governments to protect their data? Do you think there is enough transparency?
Thank you, Claire, for that follow-up. About trust. Trust is, we have to first look at the history of the country, the history of, we have to look at the people pushing these numbers out. What is the motive? As of the statistics, I feel it was more of a political move to just put numbers out there in a rush without really taking the process into account. And with such flawed processes, the public loses trust. And when you bring in such a concept like digital ID and you're telling people, whereas the concept might sound very interesting because they're telling you all you need is your biometrics. By biometrics, I mean your fingerprint, your face ID, your iris, just your physical things that are just personal to you. It might sound very interesting because they'll tell you, this system will help you, it will act as a passport, which is a good thing. I recently traveled to Kenya by road. When I reached immigration, it was quite a lengthy process. I wouldn't want to repeat that again. And they'll tell you such a process, instead of 1 hour, it can be zeroed down to 10 minutes. Great. It's exciting. They tell you things like you can easily take online classes. All these pros. But now the idea that all your data is in one place, all your data can be manipulated, all your data can be used for any agenda is quite worrying. And I don't think the young people trust their government enough with such information, with such power, because with such information there's power. So in my personal humble opinion as a youth leader, I don't think the youth, the young people are really ready to trust. And more so, I don't think this is really an issue for the young people, honestly. As a person who is in the grassroots right now, mobilizing young people, it's not part of the issues. The issues the young people are facing is access to education, quality education, health care. So, whereas this digital IDs is, as I said, it's a foreign issue. It's a foreign idea which can be embraced. I don't think this is the time the young people of Uganda need to embrace, and I don't think this is the time the government needs to put such money on it. And I don't think the trust is really there amongst the young people to really give such power to the government. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'll bring in Moses, who is a developer, software engineer. Moses, could digital IDs be vulnerable to hacking, surveillance, and the misuse of personal information?
Hello once again, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much, Claire. A big shout out to the Digital Agenda for this amazing space. Thank you, Stephen, for the submissions. Asha, Lynn on the call. Just before I get into that, my name is Moses Businge. I am a software engineer, and I have a deep interest in technology, in innovation, and even digital transformation. On my bio, when I submitted, I said I'm a photographer and also a designer. So those two I just do for passion, really, and hobbies, so to say. Yeah. So the question, to answer your question, yes, they are really, really vulnerable to hacking, even as we have heard from the previous speakers on the call here. Digital systems, digital IDs, digital systems, whatever is online, is really vulnerable to hacking. But maybe even before I get to that, just to get our listeners to sort of understand what are digital IDs. Think of it as a representation of your personal data, but that your personal data that is used, like, let me say, to verify you online. You know, you're going to make a purchase of something, but all you need maybe is a fingerprint or a facial scan, or if you've lost a SIM card before and you've gone to replace one, and then they put your fingerprint on that machine at the MTN or the Airtel offices or the driving permits place, and it pulls all your data. So that is so to say like your digital ID. Now, from a software engineering perspective, from a developer's perspective, yes, these systems are really vulnerable to hacking, to surveillance, and even to misuse of people's information. Yeah, and how I can come to that is one, hacking comes in a sense of, for example, okay, most digital IDs or digital systems that are out there are more like they're centralized. There are decentralized systems that are coming up that also are looking into this. But for now, we are seeing governments take an interest in, having a centralized digital system for currencies, for, people's information. Now, with that, you find that, for example, when these systems are put up and the databases are up there, hackers really get interested in this because it holds people's crucial information. And for example, once I have your fingerprint as a hacker, then I have access to it. Is not you're not going to go to a doctor and say, change my fingerprint. Once I have it, once I have your iris data, once I have your facial scan information, then so that is really, they are vulnerable to being hacked, and also all those cybersecurity threats fall in there. Yeah, data is able to be breached, and once that data is gone, then you can imagine your bank account information, everything can be accessed. Yeah. And then also when we look at, for example, mass surveillance, a company that has access to people's data is able to monitor and know, for example, where you are at a given time, what you are doing at a given time, and that alone puts you at a risk of being maybe, nabbed or maybe smear campaigned, and that alone poses a very big risk to individuals of a given whatever. So they can be hacked. They are prone to hacking, and hackers, when they hack into systems, probably they want to use that data to misuse it. So in the shorts and everything of it is that this is it is not good that we are getting to see. It is not good that this information is made accessible to this. However strong or however tight you can make security, it is really prone to be hacked. Yes, they are vulnerable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moses, for that submission. And maybe a follow-up question to you is, what happens when digital ID systems fail, or if at all they are misused? And are there any real-world examples of harm? Moses, can you hear me?
Sorry, my network is cutting me short. Can you please come in again?
Okay, I'll pose the question again. My question is, what happens when digital IDs systems fail, or if at all they are misused? And are there any real-world examples of harm?
Yes, thank you so much. Now, when digital ID systems fail or they are misused, the impacts of that can really be severe, because I can imagine a system failing. Say, for example, I'm going to make an e-payment, and what is needed is maybe my fingerprint or something, and I'm at the airport and I'm supposed to make a flight, and then the system fails, or I'm supposed to get a healthcare service and the system is down. So I am unable to get that, and that means, one, life can be lost, time can be lost as well. So the systems, the effect of these systems failing can really cause a very big commotion. I can imagine if hundreds of thousands of people are in need of a service, and then it's down. I think we've faced this. You've had, for example, or you've been in a situation where a bank system is not operational just for 30 minutes, or mobile money, yeah, and how distorting that can be. Then also the other thing is, for example, the other thing could be, for example, where as you age or as you mature, or due to maybe a disability, something happens to maybe your fingerprint or your thumb or your hand, and you can no longer access a particular service that you're supposed to. So that alone can, affect you as a person, as an individual or as a company. Yeah. Then also when we look at digital IDs, people with facial recognition that is tied to digital IDs can be used to, like, mass surveillance. You can easily, for example, you can easily be tracked by maybe governments or companies that hold this data, and that is life threatening, so to say, if I know where you are just by seeing where you've checked into. Yeah. And then also the other thing is that information can be spied on by maybe phone call information that is tied to your financial systems is easy. So once, so to say, these systems fail, the consequences are really, really, really gross and severe. And I think that affects the negative side of digital IDs, to me as an individual, does really outweigh the positive and the convenience that they put out there as they're rolling them out. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses, for that submission. As you were speaking, you reminded me of the CrowdStrike incident, which happened mid last year, where we had that global IT outage. And I guess for those of us who came across the articles or who got to know about it, remember that the heavy disruptions that really occurred, especially the travel industry that was highly affected. Thank you, Stephen. So I'll bring in Shanice. And maybe before I pose my question to Shanice, Lynn, I can see you on the call, but you are a listener. And so probably a request is going to be made for you to join in as a speaker. Please accept it so that you're able to speak when the time comes. Lynn, I hope you're able to hear me on that. Yes. So Shanice, my question is, does a centralized digital ID give governments and corporations too much control over personal data?
Thank you for that question, Claire. A brief introduction. I think the bio did me justice, but I am a lawyer specializing in data protection, or as we are called now, data protection officers. And I'll just jump right in. From my perspective, a centralized digital ID definitely gives governments and corporations too much control over personal data. The digital ID as the foundation for accessing nearly every service through a single digital entity means that one body will have authority over all this vast amount of personal data. This creates a risk of mass data collection, tracking, and even authoritarian control over your activities as a citizen. Additionally, such systems may lead to exclusion. If individuals cannot even access the services without compliance, for example, the marginalized communities, if they cannot even access basic services to get birth certificates, ID numbers, this system already just excludes them. We have a perfect case study here in Kenya with our attempt to implement a digital ID system, which Asha, you pronounced it quite well, Huduma number, or as we call it here, Maisha number, where we were sold a grand vision, a unique personal identifier from birth, a secure Maisha card replacing the traditional ID, a convenient digital ID, and a national popular master register. But what did we see during this rollout? We saw that data protection was a major point of contention because the plan to collect all this sensitive biometric data, it raised anxiety about privacy violations, about government and corporate overreach, and the potential for hacking and misuse of this information. We also saw that there was no publicly available data protection impact assessments. When we say data protection impact assessments, it's an assessment mandated by the Data Protection Act of if a new processing activity is happening, how does it affect your rights as a citizen, as an individual in relation to your privacy? So because there was no such assessment, the public trust was eroded, and there were concerns on transparency. We saw that the rush to digitize this system worsened the existing inequalities with historically marginalized communities such as the Kenyan Somalis, the Nubians, and others who are facing discriminatory vetting processes. We also saw that the government seemed to be implementing as they design. There was no planning, there was no pilot testing, there were lacking extensive consultations that would be needed for such a significant national program. And the rollout was prioritizing well-served areas instead of focusing on the least served regions with lower incomes, no access to technology, no access to basic needs, or even basic government services. And also the cost associated with the new system, it was becoming a revenue stream rather than an accessible right for all citizens. So don't get me wrong, digital IDs definitely have their benefits, but with a more decentralized or user-controlled approach, to its implementation and management, then maybe we can have a balance of the efficiency that digital IDs try to bring and personal freedoms. Thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Shanice. And so before I just put up another follow-up question, for those of you who are listening in, thank you once again. Probably if you have a question, you can share it in the comment section. And so there is a thread where you could post that question, and I should be able to read it to the panelists. In case you want to direct it to one of the panelists, you could specify, but if that's not possible, still I'll submit it, and one of the panelists will be happy to take it on. Yes, so Shanice, I wanted to also inquire, are there key data protection and privacy risks associated with digital ID systems, and how can they be mitigated to safeguard individuals' rights?
Thank you, Claire, for the follow-up question. And there are several key data protection and privacy risks associated with digital ID systems. First, we have privacy violations. The collection and storage of this vast amount of personal data in a centralized system increases the risk of unauthorized access and breaches. So we'll definitely have privacy violations as a risk. Another risk is potential surveillance. As I mentioned earlier, one entity having authority over this vast amount of personal data definitely creates a risk of authoritarian control over your activities as a citizen, including surveillance, as we've seen recently in Kenya with the use of geolocation policing, where police were using GPS to locate activists in the June 2024 Gen Z protests. So that is definitely a risk. We have government and corporate control, where centralized digital ID can grant excessive control to the government and the corporations over your lives as an individual, potentially leading to misuse of personal data beyond what it was originally intended for. We have hacking and misuse of information, where this centralized system is definitely very attractive to cyber attacks. And if one attack is successful, then definitely it could expose sensitive personal information to malicious actors and lead to things like identity theft, fraud, etc. So possible mitigation measures, I'd suggest, one, we are lucky enough to have data protection laws and regulations. We just have to beef them up, amend them, strengthen them to cater for specifically the context of digital IDs. Another measure would be independent oversight, where we establish independent bodies to oversee the implementation and manage the digital ID systems to just ensure that they're compliant with data protection principles, and to definitely hold accountable anyone who misuses that data. One of, or rather two of the data protection principles are data minimization and purpose limitation. What we mean by data minimization is just collecting only the data that you need for that for that intended purpose of that digital ID. You don't collect anything more. And purpose limitation, it ensures that that data you've collected for digital IDs is only used for that specific purpose and not for any other unrelated activity. Another measure would be transparency and user control, which provides you as an individual with a clear information about how your data is collected, used, and stored, and empowers you with control over your data. This control looks like the ability to access, to correct in case they have some information wrong, and potentially delete your information from this centralized database. But for this to work, we definitely need governments to implement transparent policies. Another measure would be robust security measures, which has implementation of state-of-the-art security technologies and practices. This is, for example, encryption, pseudonymization, where they redact some information or change some information that relates to you as an individual to not be recognizable. It's a form of data minimization. And secure storage to just protect this data ID, this digital ID systems from hacking and unauthorized access. Another measure would be privacy by design. Privacy by design is a term we use in data privacy to integrate privacy considerations and these principles that we've discussed into the design and development of the digital ID system from the start. So from the start, you implement not collecting too much data, not storing it in a place that is not secure, not using it for purposes that are not intended for, using encryption and pseudonymization. So if we do this from the beginning, we definitely mitigate the risks of digital IDs. And finally, it's very important to have a multi-stakeholder approach involving governments, technology providers, civil society, and even you as an individual to just develop and implement digital ID systems that prioritize protecting your data and your individual rights. Thank you. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Shanice. Lynn, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you for joining us. And you will introduce yourself at some time. Probably you could mute for a second. Yes, so much earlier, Lynn, I introduced you as a youth and human rights specialist, as an advocate. And I wanted to get your perspective on, do you think digital IDs align with faith and religious values, especially the concept of honoring the image of God in each individual? How can faith-based perspectives guide this matter of digital IDs?
All right, thank you, Claire. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. So first and foremost, maybe I'll really run through my introduction in brief. I am a lawyer by profession, an advocate, basically focusing on human rights and youth. I am also a wellness enthusiast, a mentor, as well as a leadership and life coach. So maybe just to rush into the question regarding whether digital IDs do align with faith and religious values, I will speak a lot more from the Christian perspective because I am a Christian myself. And I think you zeroed it down to the aspect of the image or the image of God. So of course, when being a Christian, when you speak of the image of God, it really goes back to the biblical times of creation and the fact that, according to Genesis 1, around 26 to 27, it shares about the fact that we as humans are created in the image or likeness of God, meaning we are exactly as He is. And in my opinion, when you look at digital IDs, even carrying through from what the other panelists have shared, we really see to it that when we get into the place of digital IDs, a lot more of our worth and freedom as humans is taken away. This is really because these systems or digital IDs, as opposed to honoring human dignity, which is the life of us being created in the image of God, they instead end up reducing we humans who are created in the likeness of God to merely being data points or numbers, because if a digital ID is to be used as the central point of, let's say, identification, that means, say, for example, as Lynn, my identification is narrowed down to my ID number or my biometrics. It could be my fingerprint, it could be my face print, something of that sort. And that really takes away from the fact that as a human being created in the image of God, I am a lot more than that. And that is literally more of
being stripped from, the autonomy I get to have as an individual, the freedom I get to have as an individual, because then every other thing about me is narrowed down to, let's say, my biometrics as a person. So I think for me that takes away from the fact that as humans, when we are created in the very likeness and image of God, we are given this dignity and free will. So that is taken away from us, because then we are zeroed down to a mere biometric or whichever other form of ID is being used to identify me as a person. And looking really even into the Bible, 2 Corinthians 3:17 tells us that where the Spirit of God is, there is liberty. And this liberty is free will. This liberty is the freedom to operate and to be my human self. That's in terms of my worth and dignity. However, these digital IDs end up really reducing someone to that particular way or mode of identification. Sorry. And then also it brings about the risk of idolatry, and over-reliance on technology. And as I share further, I think I'll tie this down or let it to the one world system. I hope you can pardon me. I have a cold, so I have a bit of a sore throat. In still looking or with reference to the Bible in Genesis, for those who are Christians, at least I'm sure we've either read of or heard the story of the Tower of Babel, where these people decided that they were going to create themselves a tower so as to be able to reach God, and they came together in oneness, unity, because they were of the same language and literally the similarity all through. And this you actually look at this, the deeper perspective of this was them coming into the place of rebellion against God. Now, in a way that might not seem as obvious, as tale of the Tower of Babel, where we are trying to be one as, let's say, one world. And this is just in rebellion against God, because then it brings in the aspect of us relying on technology. So you find that because it's this technology that we would have to rely on for, let's say, in order to access food, to access basic necessities like healthcare, then we are narrowed down to the fact that this is our one point of reliance. And yet the Bible tells us not to make idols for ourselves, but in a way that is not as direct. This digital system brings in the aspect of idolatry just by the fact that it's pointing us into the direction of us fully relying on technology in whatever different way it might seem. And like I said, I was going to tie this to the one world system, or the rise of the one world system, which is something the Bible does warn us against. That is in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, where in Daniel it describes an empire that will devour the whole earth and subdue nations, whereas in Revelations it brings in the aspect of the beast, who is or which is the Antichrist, and how he will have authority over every nation, every tribe, and all people. And even furthermore, when you continue to read Revelation 13, it brings in, I think around 16 and 17, it brings in the aspect of how the beast or the Antichrist, shall force all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slaves, to receive a mark on their right hands or foreheads that they could not buy or sell unless they have that mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. And like I said, this is not as direct, because it merely looks like a system being introduced whereby at the end of it all, we are creating, let's say, a system of convenience where for anyone to access everything and anything, you just need, let's say, your fingerprint. But at the end of it all, this leads us into that place that the Bible actually warns us about, because now that is a prophecy, the prophecy of the government, or the prophecy of the global government. It brings us into this place, and I would say one step at a time and strategically, because the globalists know what they are up to and what exactly they are doing. So you see that all these things, first and foremost, it's to make us believe that the digital system is really just a matter of convenience. And you know how even when you look at our current life cycle, there's simple things that have introduced that have brought in the aspect of convenience. Say, for example, mobile money. I can purchase anything just by the fact that I have my gadget. And yet now, it's like I said, it's a step-by-step process. And yet now, ideally, if anyone has enjoyed the convenience of things like mobile money or mobile banking and online banking, you find that it's going to be so easy for us to be convinced into that place of, all that is needed is my fingerprint. That's simple, because that would mean, as a person who loves soft life, I don't have to move with anything. I can move just with myself, and anywhere I go to access medical care, it's just my fingerprint, So all these different things, but yet it's actually a strategic move, leading us into the place whereby we'll find we have one central authority, that is controlling the entire universe, that is controlling the entire globe, and that is really the place of the global government that we are warned about through prophecies, like I said earlier, in the book of Daniel and even in Revelations. And of course, the one world system, when I speak of the fact that it's actually coming up in a not so obvious way, maybe I would love to share with us things such as I think it's the World Economic Forum that is doing so much in, promoting universal digital IDs, as in collaboration actually with the United Nations. And there's a program called, I think, ID 2020 by the United Nations, which is to the effect that every human should have or shall have a digital identity linked to their finance, healthcare, and legal systems. Now, whether you see it now or not, if you critically really think about the verses I just shared with us, it really points us to the fact that slowly but surely we are being led to that point of the one world system, because that means the fact that there is a strong advocacy being pushed for everyone to access whatever it takes only through, let's say your digital identity, which could be a fingerprint, which could be maybe a facial recognition system, something that simple. It means that we are slowly but surely being pushed to the point of having to adopt mandatory digital ID. And of course, that clearly is leading us to the part of the Antichrist being the central authority over every nation, because if it's a digital identity that is linked to everything else that we have to access, then that means we need to think and ask ourselves about the questions like, who is going to be in control over our, let's say, IDs or whichever kind of digital ID it is. Now that becomes the central authority or controlling authority. And clearly, this is all to show us, those prophecies that we've been given in Daniel 7 and Revelations 37 and even Revelations 13. And even when you look at, that part in Revelations 13 that speaks of the fact that you'd neither be able to buy or sell if you did not have the mark. I'm sure at least most of us have seen the fact that most of the countries, the globe, let me say, is pushing for a cashless economy. And this cashless economy is to be linked to your digital identity. And clearly that, whether we see it now or not, is something that is, leading us to that fulfillment of the prophecy of the mark of the beast system, which I would say as well called the one world system, where there is centralized control. Even I think looking back at, just to take us back a bit, the times of the deadly COVID-19 and how there was push for the Great Reset by the UN, the European Union, and several other entities, so to say. You realize that all this was really to try and restructure us into the place of global governance, where there is one central authority over the entire globe. Thankfully, that did not happen. But as well, that means now that we have seen the fact that these digital IDs are really pushing us or leading us into that place of the one world system, that means really, first and foremost, the values that we have of faith, the values that we have of hope, and even the fact that we ought to uphold the image of God are being, are being tampered with. And I think maybe just as I conclude, I think I've spoken a lot, but like I said earlier, you notice that all this brings us into the place of idolatry, where instead of upholding the one God that we have, we are then looking to technology, because if the cashless economy is actually successfully effected, that means we are going to look to technology, which is we're going to look to technology through the digital systems to be able to access, let's say, the banking sector, to be able to buy, to be able to sell. You get all that. And yet, clearly, that would mean we are exalting technology above God. And maybe just as I conclude, I am actually reminded of a prophecy by a man of God in Uganda, a great prophet called Prophet Elvis Mbonyi. And maybe for those who need reference, it is on his YouTube channel. It is, the prophecy is about the Silicon Valley. On December 6th, I think it was 2022, this great man of God stood before the congregation and he prophesied the collapse of the Silicon Valley. And ideally, if we all know the Silicon Valley, no one would have thought of the fact that the Silicon Valley, great as it was, would collapse, And Silicon Valley was a great, it was funding a lot of things mainly to do with technology startups. But he prophesied the collapse. And just like that, something that no one could have seen coming, this was actually fulfilled. And nations were affected. But I think one of the key things that this prophecy, or the fact that the Silicon Valley collapsed, showed us was the vulnerability of nations, because these nations had turned to reliance on the SVB because it could finance their tech, it could finance their systems or their operations. And you find that the nations we refer to as the great nations, the US, the UK, China, name it, were all affected because of the collapse of this Silicon Valley. But I think the most remarkable thing for me in this prophecy was what he called the symbolism of this prophecy, where he said, "This shall be a sign and a wonder to us, that we may rely on the Lord our God and know where our true riches come from." So for me, like in response to your second part of the question, it's really for us to stand firm in knowing that our reliance ought to be on the Lord our God, as opposed to a technology that is coming up, say, to put us under control and to summarize the world into one. So that is it from me for now. Thank you. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I will invite the panelists in a very short time to conclude on this discussion and also give their message But before I do that, and so probably I'll invite some questions. In case you have a question, please feel free to request for the mic. The host should be able to see that and grant you access to speak. And so when I see that, I'll be able to call you in. And also you can utilize the comment section, the very first thread on our page. Okay, so I'm just scrolling through to see in case there are any questions that have been presented, but none yet. And so I'll invite the speakers, and I'll start with you, Asha. Asha, what message would you give policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized
Hello, Claire. I think I kind of missed you. I didn't hear what you were saying. Could you please pose your question again? Thank you.
background? I'll invite Stephen on the same note. Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And so I'll pose the question again. And from your perspective and your standpoint, what message would you give policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized digital ID systems that include biometrics?
Okay, thank you very much. I really had a good time listening to the pre-current speakers. I must say we have really distinguished individuals on the panel, and kudos to Policy Agenda Forum for carefully selecting such great brains and individuals to be part of this panel. To answer your question, I think we must first address the question of who are policymakers. As I told you, I am a young youth leader who subscribes to the NRM party and ideology, and we have to address who are the policymakers. The policymakers are the leaders we do elect in office. So, whereas dialogue, what we are having is very important. We need to actively participate in the electoral cycle so that we become the policymakers. In Uganda, as you know, the electoral cycle it's in less than 12 months. So I urge every young person to actively participate in this electoral cycle. For those who don't know, this year the special interest groups are going into the election. That is the young people, the women, and the persons living with disabilities. So I urge us to take into these offices so that we are the policymakers, because I believe what we're doing right now is advocacy and dialogue, which is a very important aspect. But we need to take office and we need to become the policymakers. And when we become the policymakers, we can start causing change and effecting change. And I believe it's a combination or a network of very many issues in order to cause change. So I urge every young person to participate in the coming electoral cycle so that we do become the policymakers. But as of now, when we are not yet the policymakers, how can we effect change? The first is advocacy, what we are doing right now. Platforms like Digital Agenda Forum has brought itself here, giving the young people a voice to deliberate. Obviously, it's going to come up with a very concise report on what you have dialogued and engage stakeholders so that our views are well heard, our views are well noted, and it can also help in that way. Another way is dialogue. We need to continue with this dialogue amongst ourselves, dialogue with stakeholders, in order for them to understand the pros and cons of digital IDs, whether it's priority, whether it's not priority. All these issues are very, 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 very important. As one of the pre-current speakers from Kenya, she made a very interesting point whereby she was like, in Kenya it was implemented, but while it was being implemented, they were implementing it while developing it. So we don't need such a case in Uganda where they're implementing something and developing it at the same time. That will cause a very substandard product. It will cause a lot of negative attributes, which is whereby our data is prone to data hackers, identity theft, social security. If you're very well versed with cyber security, and if you're very interested in the world of cyber security, there is an individual called Hash Papi. He's right now, I think, serving a sentence of over 20 years in a maximum security facility in the US. But what he used to do was to steal social security numbers of old women in the US. So they steal your identity and reclaim your social security. Social security is like your payment after retirement. So they go reclaim your identity, get all that money, and you're broke. They get rich and spend your money. All that is issues that affect that we shall be faced if we don't implement before it's being brought into us. So my advice is for the young people to take office, take part in the electoral cycle, become policymakers. We need to become policymakers because we are the leaders of tomorrow, and when we are the leaders, we can really table these policies and really effect change. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Stephen. Asha, can you hear me?
Yes, Claire, I can hear you.
Yes. So my question to you was your last message. What message would you give policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized digital ID systems, which include biometrics?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, and to all our dear panelists for those very insightful presentations. Well, firstly, I would pose a question to our dear policymakers. Why not invest instead in fixing the real barriers to inclusion? I know the whole agenda and ideology behind digital IDs, a centralized digital ID to be more specific, is inclusion. But physically speaking, there's so many real barriers that we are facing as sub-Saharan Africa. And number one is poverty. We have corruption. We have unemployment. And rather than masking, these whole, barriers with flawed technology, why not invest all our resources in firstly fixing our number one biggest challenge, poverty and corruption? And then to our dear policymakers, I believe progress doesn't depend on technology. It does not necessarily depend on technology. It depends on access, equity, accountability, and participatory governance models. And I believe governance could rely on direct methods like town halls, paper ballots, or proxy voting through trusted representatives. And to me, I believe these systems can function without any digital IDs by leveraging physical presence or community accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asha. Shanice, I think Shanice, you're a listener. I don't know if you can request to speak so that you join the panelists again. But probably as Shanice is making that transition, so there is a follow-up question in the chat, and I'm going to read it out and invite anyone on the team to respond to it. And Eve is asking, considering that 70% of jobs now require digital skills, and that is according to the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, which was presented in 2023. How will young people compete in the job market without a verifiable digital identity? And so maybe, Stephen, we could hear from you first, positioning yourself as a youth leader and advocate.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just repeat the question again.
Okay. So the question goes, considering that 70% of jobs now require digital skills, and this is according to the World Economic Forum report for 2023 about the future of jobs, how will young people compete in the job market without a verifiable digital identity?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. If I may answer it, first and foremost, we are in the digital era. That everybody knows that for a fact. We're in the digital era, and we have to embrace it. It's a fact. And as the world evolves, new technology will come aboard. One of the issues we are facing as a country, as a third world country, as I mentioned in my earlier submission, is the digital divide. The digital divide whereby there is a difference between the haves and the have-nots. The youth who can access modern digital technology, and the ones which can't access. If you look at the demographic of the Ugandan young population, it clearly shows that it's predominantly poor, and the majority of the young people don't have access to these digital technology and all. So what government has to do is first and foremost invest in the infrastructure. Infrastructure is very important, and government has to be very intentional about it. It shouldn't be something the government will sell to buy votes. It shouldn't be something the government has to do just to look good in the public eye. Government has to be very intentional about it. It has to enable young people have access to mobile phones, enable digital literacy, whereby the young people are equipped, the young people are taught, young people are given the knowledge on how to access this. And also, government has to be very intentional about documentation. As we say, digital IDs is, when we defined it, it's just your identification in a digital format. So, government has to be very intentional about documentation. As if we are to use the previous census, which was a disaster, I think government ought to do more to the public to give them better documentation, better data collection. So government has to really be very intentional about documentation of the young people to avoid risks of exclusion, because we don't want the haves, who are the rich young people, who just constitute a very little percentage of the population of the young people, to have access to these opportunities. And we forget about the marginalized young people who are poor in the remote areas. We don't want such a situation. We need everyone to be part of this digital move. We need everyone to really benefit. So government has to be very intentional on that. And if I may just conclude, and government really needs to really give the public confidence that whereas we have your data, we are not going to use it for any other personal agenda, be it data exploitation, be it political persecution, be it surveillance, which is one of the biggest worries, because if government can just know your address, know anything, and you have political ambition, you're at risk of being persecuted and all. So, whereas it's a good thing, government has to be intentional in investing in the infrastructure if we really want to enjoy this digital age. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Stephen. So there is a question in the chat from Windu. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Windu. And I want to present this to Shanice. Shanice, can you confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you, Claire.
All right, thank you. So Shanice, I know you are Kenyan, but I'm going to present this question to you. So there is a recent rollout of national IDs in Uganda, and NERA, which is the institution in charge, is advancing with the scanning of the iris. And so from your perspective, do you think this institution even cares as we speak? Do our voices matter? And how come they are still insisting on implementing such things? And so initially, the national IDs that the citizens have at hand, the use of the fingerprint is the technology that was used. And so, don't you think that the fingerprint in the first IDs is enough on that note, without advancing to the scanning of the iris?
Thank you for that question, Claire. In my opinion, this takes me back to what I had just spoken about. One of the principles of data protection is data minimization. There is no need for you to collect more than what you need to perform a service. If already fingerprints are being utilized, what is the need to collect further biometric data when it comes to irises? This is just an example of how data protection principles are being disregarded or not really being observed, because this is a simple case of collecting too much data. So what are they using it for? Maybe if you can justify in the instance of maybe someone's fingerprint has been eroded. I had a scenario like that with the Indians. They worked, the fingerprints were not readable. Then that is a justification maybe for further processing of irises. But at the moment, definitely not. It raises the questions: do they have adequate security measures? What are they using the extra scans that they're collecting for? Have they justified that the fingerprints are insufficient? Have they conducted a data protection impact assessment to see how the scanning of these irises is going to affect your rights and your privacy freedoms? It raises a lot of questions that are pertinent to the conversation, because then that means the government system is just failing you as a citizen. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Shanice. And maybe before Asha comes in to address the next question, I wanted you to also submit what message would you give policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized digital ID systems, which include biometrics?
My parting shot to policymakers would definitely be learn from our mistakes as Kenyans when it comes to the implementation of digital IDs. We have the problem as Africans is it's not the laws that we have. We have laws. They are quite lovely in the frameworks how they're framed. We just need to actually implement what we have in our laws to fix the potholes or the gaps that are present. And this is definitely the job of policymakers to fix whatever laws it is that we have to actually function for our citizens. But in the same breath, I would definitely like to issue a challenge to each and every one of us speaking. Are you exercising your role as a citizen and using your voice? The story is still being written when it comes to digital IDs. And in all honesty, the policymakers who are currently there are all old people. They don't understand what is going on in the digital space. They don't understand what technology brings. The people who understand it are you and I, the youth, the young population, who is actually going to be the most affected by these technological changes and digital IDs. So my challenge to you is use your voice. Speak out. let's continue educating ourselves. Let's continue having these conversations. Let's continue telling our stories. Use whatever means are available to you. X spaces like this, social media, educate your fellow citizen, your fellow brother at home. Let us have these conversations on a daily. Let us exercise our voices, because we have seen it have an effect in our country. We have seen policymakers listen to the youth and implement what it is that we have to say. So that would be my parting shot. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Shanice. And so before Moses comes in with his message to the policymakers, I wanted to ask you, Asha, and I know this was presented by Stephen, but on the team, one mentioned that digital IDs are not one of the top concerns for the youth currently. However, when you look at the UN report, it shows that 281 million people, many of whom are young, are international migrants. And without a digital ID, how do you suggest that displaced youth access essential services or employment in their new locations?
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, for that question. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, speaking about the displaced youth, if I'm not, mistaken, most of these displaced youth, you can find that most of them are illiterate, and and most of them are put in camps that maybe do not have electricity. So, and a digital system, requires a high level of literacy, and also it requires electricity and all that. But my issue is centers around centralized digital IDs. By centralized, I mean like you cannot access, any services without digital ID. So that is where my issue comes in. And earlier on, I did suggest that in such instances where the youth maybe continue access the digital IDs and all, maybe the immigrants or the displaced, youths and all that. I had suggested that governments or organizations could issue, physical cards. These have worked before and they can still work, vouchers or certificates, that serve as proof of identity or eligibility for services. But in instances of maybe where there's a digital ID, I suggested they shouldn't be linked, to biometric linkage. They could be just maybe QR codes and all that. So, for me, I would suggest maybe also additionally, in instances of maybe like a digital ID, just so to say, should be designed with robust, data protection and privacy safeguards, to ensure that the personal data of displaced, youth is protected and secure. To which, the system that we have right now, you can't guarantee that. You cannot guarantee that, your data is going to be protected and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. And my last question to you. So it was noted that policies for global digital ID, they emanate from institutions like the World Economic Forum, Gates Foundation, and this is through UN and EU. And the question is, why should sovereign governments cede power and control to unelected bureaucrats? So this is a question from Stefan in the audience.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan, for that question. But I believe, from my perspective, I believe sovereign governments should not cede, power and control to unelected bureaucrats, so to say, as this could undermine national sovereignty and democratic accountability and the representation of national interests. Instead, governments should maintain control over their own data, data policies and participate, Of course, they can participate in international corporations and, with international, forums and all that. But for me, the issue is they should really maintain, our national sovereignty, whereby they shouldn't just hand over, or cede control or power onto globalists, over their own citizens, because I believe our governments should serve, their citizens first. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Asha. Moses, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. I can hear you.
Thank you. And so my question to you is, what message would you give policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized digital ID systems, which include biometrics?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for once again, the opportunity to be on this space. Now, my parting shot to the policymakers would be, first of all, from a software engineering standpoint and perspective, the conversation around digital IDs is not just about convenience, but it's mostly and is about building systems that are secure, that are ethical, and those that are resilient. Yeah, a well-designed digital ID system should be one that it is secure, it is private, it's decentralized, very key, decentralized and rather than centralized, because when it's centralized, then we get into things like control, we get into things like, overseeing and controlling people, which is what, the CBDCs are aiming for. And also a well-designed digital ID system is one that is inclusive. No one is left behind. Now, technology is neutral, and it reflects the values of those who build it. Now, if we fail to create systems that are ethical and secure, then we risk exposing millions of people to surveillance, to exclusion, and even to fraud. But if we do the right thing, we can build a future where digital IDs really empower individuals rather than control them. Yes. And also, as I get to part, if I stood before a panel of policymakers in government, I would leave them with a question and ask them: are we creating systems that truly empower citizens, or ones that put them at risk of exclusion or surveillance? I would want to hear from their viewpoint as well. But in my view, we need to see more awareness as well going out to the people out there. I remember a scenario where I think it was in Kampala here. There was a company, it's an international company. It was called WorldCoin, and ideally they were purchasing people's data. Yeah. Because of course Ugandans are gullible. They didn't know what they were doing. I think they promised them small money here and there. I think it was about 40,000-50,000. But what people were making queues to sell their personal data. Yeah. So you'd find people, I think it was around Kochi Tower, for those who know that place. Yeah. I remember such a scenario, and because of lack of awareness, people were getting into what they really didn't know, but because they were promised some money. Yeah. So I feel like government and we, through such initiatives like what Digital Agenda is doing, continuing to empower the people, we need to continue seeing the conversation going on in schools, in academic institutions, in universities. We need to see a time where maybe there is a competitive hackathon for young developers, young software engineers from different universities competing to build systems that are robust, systems that are secure, and are targeting into the digital ID space. I think that would be a very nice thing to see as we continue pushing the conversation forward. I submit, and thank you so much for giving me the privilege to be on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moses. Lynn, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for confirming. So Lynn, much earlier you made a submission on faith and of course the concept of honoring the image of God, and you shared about the Bible prophecies, the now prophecies, making mention of Prophet Elvis Mbonye. And from that standpoint, I want you to share a message to the policymakers concerning the implementation of centralized digital ID systems, which include biometrics.
All right. Thank you, Claire. I think really the first thing I would say is there is nothing new under the sun. And really speaking from a faith perspective, or specifically a Christian perspective, it's for us to, keep at heart, keep in mind the fact that there is nothing new under the sun. And there is, biblical reference for whatever we are trying to do. Like I shared earlier on, we can see from the tale of the Tower of Babel that there is nothing we try to do, that is against, or that is to go against the sovereignty of God, that would stand. And even looking still at the now prophecy, like you said, the one given by Prophet Elvis Mbonye about the Silicon Valley, there is nothing we are going to do that is against the agenda of God, the Most High God, that will actually stand. So I think it's really for us, first and foremost, to see to it that, and even for the policymakers to see to it that whatever system is being introduced actually aligns to what God would want for us to do, more so in the right time and in the right season, because we've seen men of God, such as Prophet Elvis Mbonye, who have, seen and given us prophecies about things that we have seen come to pass. And I think it's really important that religious leaders like this, or spiritual leaders like this, are involved in the process of, policies, whether it's policy making or even the initial consultation stages, because then we won't be able to run ahead and do things that are going to work against us. Why? Because the Lord has given his sight and his mind to such religious leaders. So I think it's really for us to understand and know that, even like in the biblical times where the kings consulted firstly from the prophets before they took a stand to do anything, we need to embrace that, because like I said, there is nothing new under the sun, and that order is not going to change. So it's really for the government leaders, the people that are part of these, so to say, great societies and organizations, not to overlook the fact that there are men on this earth whom God has fully given his vision, and these should be fully involved in the process of these policies. They should be consulted. They should as actually be, the first people to be consulted on the fact that, let's say we want to adapt thing ABCD. What is the mind of the Lord? And also really for me, the other thing is for us as Christians, what I would say for us as Christians, and more so Christians in these spaces, is to use our voices and do not allow to be turned down maybe by the fact that you could be one person, let's say in a room of 1 million people speaking about things from a Christian perspective. No, now is the time for us, to stop being background Christians, but for us to front our values, for us to front our perspectives, and to stand bold in our faith, because like I said, and I will still emphasize, there is nothing new under the sun. And if we've seen throughout biblical times that those on the side of the Lord emerge victorious, then that is not about to change. But most importantly, I'll just emphasize, we need to involve the religious and spiritual leaders and communities in the process of policy formulation and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for that key message. And as we come to the end of this discussion, I suppose the audience agrees with me that it has really been insightful. And you can join me to thank the panelists for the day, Asha, Stephen, Moses, Shanice from Kenya, Lynn, thank you so much for sparing your time and enlightening us, and also speaking about digital IDs. It's really been insightful. And of course, to the audience, thank you very much for joining us. We believe this conversation is very important and timely. And of course, like we've had tonight or this morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone, that the whole concept of digital IDs, it represents more than just a technological shift. And we've seen that it raises very deep questions on inclusion, on privacy, on trust, on human rights. And of course, as digital IDs are being presented as tools for development, we must ask, are these really serving the people they claim to empower, or in the process, are they reinforcing existing inequalities and also vulnerabilities? So in a nutshell, we need to consider the very concerns that have been raised and voiced by the young people around access, around the digital divide, around surveillance, around misuse of this data, and of course, not forgetting the pressing problems. And I like the fact that even in their submissions, they kept on talking about the scope of sub-Saharan. And we know that there are more pressing problems, quality education, that probably the governments need to pay more attention to, or prioritize with. So as we close the session, so probably as a Digital Agenda Forum, we are calling onto the youth to voice. We know as you voice is power. Of course, stay informed around the whole digital ID concept. And even as you stay informed, speak out and push for systems that reflect your realities, the realities that you've shared from, and of course, those that protect your rights. And also at the same time, we're calling on to the policymakers and institutions that are listening in to us, or that will come across this conversation or any other, that inclusion and transparency must guide your strategies. And so it's important to consult communities meaningfully. And of course, design systems which are based on human rights, not just data-driven. And of course, to the people who are developing these systems, the tech survey, the software engineers, the data scientists, even as we build, we must have the ethic perspective in mind. And so elements that have been talked about, such as human-centered design, privacy, accessibility, we shouldn't look at them as luxuries, but rather as necessities, even as we're developing these systems. And of course, to the faith leaders, like Lynn submitted much earlier, that we ought to uphold the image of God. But of course, just to bring to remembrance, and it's written somewhere in Colossians, that all things were created for God and by God. And so in this regard of digital IDs, it would mean that we're looking at tech that is going to serve the agenda of God. Of course, being cognizant that everything was created for Him and by Him. So assuming that we're at the same standpoint, just a call that together let's raise questions about dignity, about justice, and upholding the image of God. So this conversation will continue. Let's keep engaging with courage, with clarity, And thank you very much once again for joining us on this digital agenda. So we remain a Digital Agenda Forum. And like I said much earlier, we embrace technology, but we specifically embrace technology that serves the agenda of God. A good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. Thank you once again. We will stop here. Thank you.